There we go. Excellent. So now the second introduction. Welcome to the Architects X Live Real World Automation. So I'm your host, Christopher Cusack. I'm a cloud architect here at VMware Broadcom, and we have some amazing guest panelists on today who are going to talk about their real world automation use cases. It's live Q&A, so feel free to drop your questions in the Q&A and enjoy yourselves in the chat as well. I'm going to start by introducing Anthony, then Don, and then we're going to kick off into having Don lead off in something. So, Anthony, why don't you kick off with a little brief introduction of yourself?
Oh, hi everybody. Nice to thank you, Chris, for inviting me onto this panel. My name is Anthony Hornacek. I've known Chris for a few years, and I've been working with VMware for almost 20 years in my 30-year career. And um, I'm just I'm just delighted to be here. Chris invited me and worked with him at Explorer for my first session, and I'm looking forward to sharing my experiences with everyone here. And God forbid if there's some of my teammates out there mocking me in the background, so find out.
And you did an amazing session at Explore. That was 2 years ago, and it was absolutely epic. I mean, that was widely attended, and everyone appreciated everything you had to share during that session. And if anybody else on the line is interested in, checking out Sessions Explore or submitting for Sessions Explore, definitely, we can talk about that in the chat. Don, why don't you kick off an introduction as well?
Yeah, thanks, Christopher, and thanks for having me on what is your inaugural panel for Architects Edge. Yes, good afternoon or good morning, depending on where you are in the world. My name is Don Horox. I'm a systems engineer for Moffitt Cancer Center. I've been in the industry for 17 years, 15 of which serving healthcare, and I believe this is my 6th year at Moffitt. That went by pretty quick. I've worked with Christopher and with Dale, who's I see is on our panel as well, for 2 or 3 years now. Great resources, a lot of knowledge, and it was speaking of sessions at Explore. It was my great pleasure to co-present with Dale at Explore 2024 last year regarding automation, operations, and operations for logs as well. Great session, and we had some great conversation.
So Don, why don't you get us started with, how did you get started with automation? Like, what was your first step?
Sure. So around 3 years ago now, Moffitt was interested in automation, and it was the classic, we just want to build VMs because it takes too long to do it today with our manual process, and that was the crown jewel at the time, right? So myself and one of my colleagues just went, shoulder deep into it, and we had to go through the whole process of, okay, what are the business requirements? What are the technical requirements? And what are we trying to do? I mean, we're trying to provision VMs in an automated fashion, but we're also trying to standardize, right? We want to make sure that everything's deployed in a consistent way, ideally hardened as much as it can be. There's more that goes into it than just becoming a vehicle for delivering the VM. So we have to take all those things as requirements, digest them, and I don't know if it's, if you want to do a mind map or a bulleted list in Word, whatever it is, but you have to keep track of all those things because those become your objectives, right? So all that in mind, sounds like a lot of work, a lot of moving parts. It's important to not try to boil the ocean all at once, start with your delivery vehicle for the VM and then build on top of it. That was the easiest way for us to get started, is just to get in there, do a phase one where you just deliver the VM and then build on top of that.
Any, I guess, like learning lessons as you kind of went through that initially, challenges you had to overcome, like some of the, so because as everyone's getting started, whether they're brand new to automation or they've been doing it forever, there are certain things that you run into in the beginning and you still run into on a regular basis. I'm like, can you speak to a little bit about those as well?
Yeah, sure. Depending on how, again, if you assuming you want to do more than just become the vehicle for delivering a VM, it would really be helpful to be familiar with either PowerShell, Python, or even JavaScript, those will help you with your ABX actions or Orchestrator, if that's what you prefer. And speaking from our experience, one of the lessons we learned was don't be afraid of Orchestrator. When we started our journey, we were definitely not Orchestrator fans. ABX actions were the path of least resistance for us. And that's when we met Dale, and Dale actually did a lot of work to help us become more comfortable with Orchestrator. And now it's actually what we prefer compared to ABX actions. So we've completely switched sides there. So I guess, having a good idea of what you're comfortable with, scripting languages and whatnot, but keep a super open mind that you're doing something totally different in your environment. And now is not the time to try to maintain the status quo with, let's just use ABX actions because it's easier. No. Go big, learn something new.
Well, and Orchestrator is not new to anybody, right? A lot of people may not necessarily. Orchestrator is a component for orchestrating automation actions and functions inside of, vRealize automation or ARIA automation or VCF automation or VCAC, no matter which way you kind of look at it. But before all of that, and independent of its use in automation, it's been a licensed component for at least back in the day. If you had vCenter, you had access to Orchestrator, right? Back in those days, it was called vCo, right? vCenter Orchestrator. But I've always found it wasn't adopted nearly as often or as much. It was, you didn't know you were licensed for it, or you used it insanely intensely, right? That was and out of the box, when you launch automation for the first time, a lot of you may not realize, hey, if any of you have VCF in your entitlement today, you're licensed for automation, so you can do everything that Don's going to talk about, Anthony's going to talk about, and some of the others. But the lesson on that is there's like 500 out-of-box workflows right there inside of the orchestration workflows you can take advantage of automation. So rather than having to do, how do I do this for the first time? It's, oh, wow, what are of a book of a various series of things that I can start to adopt and leverage and use. So Anthony, let's kind of bring you over into things as well. And what kind of advice would you give someone just starting in their automation journey, and may have applied when you first got and kicked off on some of this?
When I started in my automation journey, it was an accident. I wasn't even anywhere near any of the radars or even in my career path to like, oh, I'm going to be going towards automation. It just kind of fell in my lap. I was working in a hospital system before I ended up with in the Empire Health Plan, which I'm on my second year. The hospital system I was at, we had a couple of good engineers that I was working with. They were supposed to be slated to take on the automation project, and they moved on to other careers. And coming from scratch, it was a little scary at first. We had vRealize automation 7.5, and that was a robust beast and very complicated one for me to see for the first time. And then when I got the introduction to ARIA automation at version 8.8, it was introduced in such a way that it made it more comfortable. I was just getting into probably in the last 15 years, 10, probably about 10 years, I've been getting into a lot of scripting, a lot of PowerShell scripting, just like what Don was mentioning, if you're getting into scripting. And once I got into PowerShell, I got into PowerCLI, and I started realizing, you know what, I'm so busy. I need to find a way to help me do some mundane day-to-day tasks a little bit quicker, just so that I can get to my next to do. And I started doing stuff. Then I started scripting stuff to save myself, instead of 15 minutes, 15 seconds, to perform a simple report or lookup, or maybe just trying to populate something or move something. And when my first diving into automation, it got really interesting on how you saw the suite touch everything. And the one thing I started to learn is I needed to understand what my business really needed this for. And I started to interview and talk to the engineers that would actually be touching this, and talking to management on what they need. the biggest thing in any kind of introduction, especially for the first time, is understanding your business needs, because every business is going to want it done in a certain, their workflows are going to be different, from hospital system to now the IEHP. This is another environment where we're bringing in automation brand new for the first time for the organization. I knew right away I had to understand what the workflow is that they have, because it was completely different from where I was coming from. Instead of an environment that didn't have a development or DevOps community, now I have a DevOps community. What do they need? What's the difference between rolling out production versus rolling out to a team of developers? There's going to be different needs. Who wants these first? What's going to roll out next? How do we want to handle that? And it's a lot of just spending time of talking with your engineers and leadership.
No, I mean, you nailed it on the head there, and especially a lot of people are looking at these things from different lenses, and it changes from org to org. So I'll ask this, Anthony. What do you love about automation? Let's start there. What do you love about automation, right? Does it save you time, right? Because that's one of the big things. Like, oh, I'm going to automate. That's going to save me time. Well, how much? I automated this 15-minute process. Only took me like 3 years. Right? Like, that's a bad example, but a really.
What, that's part of it. It's part of it. It's like, oh, I just saved my time doing this. I got the same buzz from what I did when I was scripting stuff. Like I created, when I was scripting with PowerShell and PowerCLI, and then PowerTools for Cisco and anything else that PowerShell would attach to, I got a buzz like, oh my gosh, I can do this. I can save my time here. I ended up creating my own like menu of options in my own script that would allow me to just, to the point where I would just hit a number and then run, and then would execute what I wanted. And then when I was getting introduced into automation, and then just diving knee deep, I was going into the deep end, to the point where I'm like, YAML code, what the heck is that? And so when I started learning about YAML and how a file essentially gives you all the information to a machine, and then how that one machine can then link to other systems to perform other automated tasks, I'm like, how the heck can I make this so that you don't have to do anything but click one button? I got so buried into the fact that you can make things so slick to where it's almost no touch, literally almost no touch. And then hours of work can be done in seconds. That's what I got the bug. And like, I would lose myself in a script. Like, I couldn't be working in a PowerShell script, and next thing you know, 3 hours have gone by and I've never moved, which is bad. Make sure you stand up every once in a while and walk around. The same thing happened when I started working in automation and working with those types of files, and the fact that you can bring in other scripting languages, which I don't know others. I'm learning Perl. That's a little bit harder, but when you bury yourself in the scripting and you enjoy it, and then the fact that you can take those different languages and link it to the exact task you're doing, you end up just I came from an art background, and you try to figure out the most creative way to do something, and you get the enjoyment afterwards is kind of, you a little euphoric. I mean, like, you're excited, you want to share it with everybody.
Oh, absolutely. Now, I've got lots of questions I'd like to ask, but so does our audience, and this is really about them. So, the question that was asked in the Q&A is, and this is for you, Anthony, and you, Don. Feel free, one of you chime in. Do you use any service catalog for your VM build, retire, change requests? Whether it be a service catalog, the service catalog function within automation, or you're using like ServiceNow or an external service catalog that's then calling those catalog items.
In my environment, we're currently using the service catalog and service broker for VCF automation, but we do have plans to expand to ServiceNow probably within the next year.
And I'll ask that, are you planning to do that through the ServiceNow ITSM plugin that connects right into Vera, or you're going to hand jam it through API calls? I say that because I've seen it done both ways.
I'll say that we're leaning toward the marketplace connector. We still have to discuss that with our the team that manages ServiceNow. So
Mhm.
we'll see if there are any roadblocks or challenges there. We're open to either direction, but to your point, you could go either way on that. But if you use the connector, you're using the supported method, which is more, I'm going to say, resilient to change over time with
Mhm.
API version differences as things are updated, in the software over time. If you
Absolutely.
do it manually, that's on you to have to track, and debug every time there's an update or something like that. That
Yeah, or they
maybe
would
the
fire
language
an
changes.
SDK or
Yeah,
something, or a component within the API, which happens at times.
it
Absolutely.
does.
And what I like about that, for anyone who's leveraging ServiceNow in there, it's not a VMware ServiceNow management pack. It's it's an ITSM management pack inside of the ServiceNow marketplace. So it's not like you're going to the VMware marketplace. You're getting it directly from ServiceNow. So it feels more supported at that part because and it makes it a lot more tenable and connectable into the environment. So I'm a particular fan of that approach as well. I have seen where why don't you leverage any? Oh, we're writing everything as straight API calls. I'm like, but we changed that API. Like, yeah, you can't do that. We're running an ancient version because of those changes. Anthony, same for you, service catalog that you're using?
Oh, well, at the hospital system, we actually were working with the provided ServiceNow plugin to
Hmm.
our automation. But to be honest, it wasn't something that was delivered out to end users or other teams. It was so that the tickets that eventually went to our team anyways, and some of the other maybe um, tier two engineers would at least have everything right there to where they get the ticket, fill it out, and then do the submission. Right now, we're just for Inland Empire, we're just going ahead and we're going to be just presenting because of the dynamic, like I mentioned before, about having knowing your audience and knowing the customers you're delivering to. Um, we're making a reference. We're just making a reference to the ticket. Maybe there's a submission, but then it's going to be just linked out to where the DevOps are going to give a small subset of things to answer in a form from the catalog, and that's it. But it's going to be quick and simple. That's the one thing I'd be careful with is that when you are delivering these catalog items to your audience, how much information are you going to deliver to them? How many options are you going to give them? For DevOps, we want to keep it very simple. We don't need them asking and exceeding resources that are there. They need to know what's available and the options they have. Is it small, medium, or large? Do you want to supersize it? That's all you get.
Mm-hmm.
You're only going to get delivered in one place. You're not going to have a lot of options. What's your name and how long do you want it? That's it.
Yeah, that's
Versus
true, man.
over at the hospital system, it got so detailed we had to put it into ServiceNow so that all that information can get recorded, and
Well,
especially going to the CMDB for inventory purposes.
well, and those true having menu items to choose from makes it more deliverable and consistent rather than hey, you've got ingredients in your kitchen, make this for me, because then it's you're stepping outside the bounds of automation. I For this next question, I'd like Brian to introduce himself, one of our other panelists, so he can answer this question being asked around resistance from other silos. And I want to hear Anthony and Don's response on that, but Brian, I think definitely has a lot to share on this particular subject.
Yeah. Hi, Brian Solins, Solutions Architect here at VMware by Broadcom. And I'm going to tell my story very quickly. And that's going to go up right. It is actually related to answering the question, which is encountering resistance from other silos in an organization, right? But no, I got the automation bug in 2014. I did two things at that time. I was a member, I was an engineer on a a member of a 7 team. We had 7 members on our team who were managing a big healthcare cloud. Dell. I was working at Dell at the time. I don't know if that cloud's around anymore, but it was a managed service that ran on VMware, and we scaled up by the enclosure. So we had blade enclosures, and we went up 32 to 64 hosts at a time. So, and we started doing that manually. I don't know if you've ever stood up 32 A6i hosts manually. It's not fun. And a buddy of mine showed me a tool at the time. You're probably aware of it. It's a lone tool at the time called Ansible, where he went out and he staged up all the firmware updates across 600 blades in seconds. And I was like, that's it. This is what I want to do. So I focused my career on automating all the things, and the rest is history. So that was 2014. And then I got hired at a pretty large outdoor vendor that isn't Amazon. And we were responsible for the e-commerce. What is this, 1998? For the website where people bought tents at 2 o'clock in the morning, and our job was to make sure that people could do that. And getting into the whole answer about how you overcome a lot of the pushback that you're going to get. First of all, in my experiences, I actually had more pushback from my peers than I did from other silos. That's number one. And the big sort of advantage that I had is that I have always had a pretty big interest in cloud economics. So whenever I would automate something, I would always do it responsibly, which is I would go through and I would figure out if I do this automation, which, by the way, I came up with my own algorithm on this, which I have published in my blog. I'm going to put my blog out there, I guess. It's fine. Later. But if you can justify making money back based on the automation that you're doing, that sells it typically to leadership. And once you have leadership, then a lot of those silos tend to go away, because it kind of trumps that, provided that you have leadership who is willing to listen and understands what that means. So the economics piece allows for you to overcome a lot of that. The second thing that also helps, and I know this is a bit of a luxury that we had at the time, is to have a completely separate test lab where you run your automation through that. And the more like for like that is with the rest of your production environment, the better. And when I know there's going to be automation that can be contentious, I would actually do it on my own, let it run, try to break it, do some sort of chaos engineering, which, usually chaos engineering is in prod. But anyway, I would go through and I would, run it successfully, present it as an idea that I want to do this thing. And then people will be like, we don't know if it's going to work. Actually, I know it's going to work. It's in the lab that you've been using for a month and you didn't even know it. So that's number two. And then I think the third thing ultimately is going back to the leadership backing and that economics thing. I was fortunate enough also to have leadership who backed me. And I'll close with one short story. One of the things that we did at the organization I worked for before VMware is we treated our ESXi hosts as pluggable entities, right? We treated them as farm animals. We didn't have static ESXi hosts, which was, I can fully automate the process of, I need 2 hosts from this underutilized cluster, and I'm going to take those 2 hosts and within 18 minutes, plug them into a totally separate cluster, just like that, all right? As part of that automation, I wanted to go with a generic naming mechanism that incremented by 1. So it would be ESXi host 001, 0020. So my automation would just go in and automate that process. The problem was that everybody wanted it to go by a naming convention that they could look at it at a glance and say, oh, I know where that host is. Well, you can do that through tagging, which in vCenter is literally an inch over in the interface. So I spent 3 meetings over 3 weeks fighting with my peers over, hey man, we should start using tagging for its intended purpose. And I finally went to my boss and I'm like, I threw my hands. I don't know how to get them to buy in on this. It's a super easy thing. And he's like, we'll just do it. He's like, do it. You have my backing, document it. It's part of the standard process now. I'll back you up on it. That was magical. And I followed that lead. So to sum up, economics, test lab, leadership buy-in. And then the big answer ultimately, and one of the things we're asking with VCF, I guess number 4 is de-silo all the things. I know that's really more of a political thing, but this is something that we're asking of our customers ultimately with VCF, because the less siloed you are, which by the way, whenever you say getting rid of silo does not mean you're getting rid of responsibilities, right? So keep that in mind that, trying to de-silo as an organization is also going to lead to success. Other people say things now.
No, absolutely, Brian. That's perfect. And I even think back to some of my early ancient automation stories. And it's have a message and a mission around why you're automating something. I remember I automated something 30 plus years ago, and it was mainly to remove the chance for user error. Yes, it'll make things faster. Absolutely. That's the key part. Yes, the goal is, but the goal is to make things faster, to make them efficient, to make them consistent, but also why do 200 steps when 3 will do, right? Because we had this one automation case where it was like step 126 that people kept making a problem on, and then we'd have to go and do everything over again. And I'm like, oh wow, all those steps in there, we can get this down to 3 things that actually need to be entered, and the rest of it can be fully automated. And it took a project, because we were doing things at high levels of scale manually. We were doing things at high level of scale manually, and then took that down to very, very few steps, which made that process significant. And to that point around pushback, after that project was done, after we were all said and done, this was a hospital system in Chicago back 30 plus years ago. After the entire project was done, the team went back to doing things that manual way because they like the kick off the install, go have a cup of coffee, go smoke a cigarette, go do a thing, come back, press enter key, right? It doesn't make it right. And they're getting that pushback from some parts of the organization. That can happen. All you can do is do as best of a job that you can possibly have, which kind of ties into the next question we have is, what are some of the things you find challenging or frustrating? And I kind of mind that was something frustrating, is people were standing in the way of operational innovation. But I know for any of you out there, Don, Anthony, or Dale, if you want to chime in as well.
Can I
Yeah,
just
go
one
ahead.
thing on
Yes,
what you
sir.
just said, Christopher?
Mhm.
Anybody who is sitting in this webinar and thinking I'm too small to automate, the one thing to think about is automation isn't always about speed. It's about standard configuration, and infrastructure engineers in particularly are very, very big on standards and ensuring that everything is in a consistent state. It's more secure, it's more resilient, it's more available. For example, day 2 configuration management is a thing. And it doesn't matter whether you have 4 hosts, 40 or 400, having a consistent configuration that is an automated way gets rid of that human error. And that is, in addition to the whole speed aspect, the consistency is super important.
Absolutely.
I want to add to what Brian said. In terms of standard configuration and day 2 operations. One of the biggest things I really got into that RA Automation provided. Now it's called RA Automation Config. At the time when we got it, it was still called SaltStack, and we had ties into delivering to Ansible and delivering to SCCM, but there were still standards that we had to deliver that we knew we couldn't do during the build process of a virtual machine. Servers that had to be built out had to be not just named a specific way, but permissions had to be created a specific way and the naming conventions of those permissions, whether they're usernames, groups, or whatever, had to be placed in a specific in a specific location in Active Directory. Our automation config allowed us to do all of those extra things after the machine was delivered and at rest. We can still standardize on those day 2 tasks to where group is created. Grab the name of the machine over here. Make sure the group has got the same name of the machine with this attached to it, so we know it's a group. Then go ahead and add those members, put them back into the machine, and then go on to the next steps to make sure we have the agent for SCCM deployed properly, so that it can go ahead and grab its updates and grab its standards from SCCM. So we're not taking away from other tools that are designed to manage specific configuration standards. They're going to keep doing their duty. We're just going to add that extra element to do the handoff. Same thing with Ansible. We're going to go ahead and hand it off to Ansible so Ansible can do its configuration management of that machine. And then once it comes back up, and then at the same time, we're going to head, firewall has a standard, we're going to have and configure all that stuff, permissions, initial configurations based off of a standard subset of requirements before a VM is handed off. That we found, that is what I found pretty exciting, is the fact that it's not just I'm going to perform this at this point to deliver this system, but I'm also going to lock it down, standardize it, and deliver it properly so that my standard operating procedures have not changed. And if a standard operating procedure changes in leadership, you only have one place to make that change and update it, and then roll that process out again. Instead of, oh, I got to make sure it's, maybe we're making a process change. I don't want to go back and have to manually check all this stuff. I can go ahead and go back to one place instead and save my time and effort. And like you were saying before too, if you're a smaller shop, it's also saving you time, because as a smaller shop, you just get more and more work piled onto you regardless. So to find a way to save you time and stay in a standard configuration, a standard requirement based off of a certification or compliance setting, that will help you stay that way, and then you can move on to other things. Because the one thing I understand, from a small shop to a medium, even to an enterprise, everybody's to-do list ends up getting very long, whether you're automating or not. So to sort of not cut corners, but to save you a few minutes here and there, that automation will benefit you in the long run.
Well, and I love that, Anthony, and especially the kind of right tool for the right job, right? When I think about, if I'm going to automate something within, or if I was going to do some type of function within a Windows server, and I'm like, oh, we've got SCOM, we've got SCCM, right? Like, yeah, leverage that. Like, you're going to replace that. Like, no, I'm going to leverage that which you already have that's doing those. But if I'm doing anything, so if I were doing SCCM and SCOM for Hyper-V, absolutely, yeah, use that, do that. If you were to say, hey, can we use VCF automation to manage my Hyper-V environment? I'd be like, please don't. It's just don't. But if you're going to be leveraging and doing anything within vCenter, within vSphere, within ESX, anything that's a virtual machine or a container that's inside that bubble, absolutely you want to leverage it and everything it has available to it. And there's a key part in that. When I say everything it has available to it, it's day two operation function and operational deployment. It's integrations with Ansible and Terraform and any of the other third parties like Infoblox or some of the other IPAM solutions, right? It's taking it and using it as that framework to go and manage those other components, right? We talked before around Orchestrator. All these things are, because it's not just, hey, I'm going to do everything I can possibly do inside of Assembler or inside the service broker. Like, yeah, but all these other pieces connect into it. So if I have a really good PowerShell script that does all the work I need to do, and I want to instantiate it and then tie it into my existing workflow, I would rather you do that than try to like, how can I hand jam every step of that into an orchestrator function? Like, just don't. Because you already did a really good job of building this thing into this, and now you can tie it into the rest of the business. So you can build upon those successes and make it better. Hey, I've got this really good Ansible playbook. I love it. Let's use it. Right? You're not going to make me rebuild everything. No, God, no. Please don't try and repurpose and make everything fit into a particular bubble, because certain things do their function really well that you've done really good on it. And if it's anything running inside the VCF stack, leverage the VCF automation tools and then have it tie the areas where it's appropriate. Because you'll find if by doing something else, hey, if I change it to this other way, it's actually going to save me more. Oh, absolutely. Save you more time, save you money. Definitely make a change, but don't make a change just for the sake of thinking you have to, right? But again, anything that's in the box, absolutely leverage, because if any of you have VCF, you're entitled to it. So you're best to take advantage of the tools at your disposal, as opposed to, ooh, that's just too much, or I'm already doing it another way, so I'm not going to try to adopt something that's going to make, life cycle day two operational function for my end users who are otherwise just creating a ticket and saying, hey, I need this done, so you do it. You high-paid engineer, I need you to go add a drive to this thing or expand, some memory or something along those lines. Because those are functions that you can deviate out with proper tooling and such like that to say, yes, I'll give you additional memory, but you got to go through this workflow, which is you request, we approve, and then the job is done, as opposed to I submit a ticket, I ask you to do it, you go and allocate time, you go do the thing, and you respond to the ticket. So you're taking a lot of your time and effort and their time and effort out and providing something that actually drives on a value out of there. Now, I want to Dale, do you want to come on, talk to us a little bit? Also, tell us about your blog, because I know you've done so many amazing things and shared so many awesome things about automation on your blog in particular.
Yeah, I put the address to my blog in the chat for anybody to grab. Since it sounds like this is for people maybe just getting started, and if there's any advice that I would give those group of people is start small. Prove to your organization that automation works. When I was a customer, we would just, clone VMs and then stop and then prove to the organization that, hey, that works. And then what happened in my situation was the Active Directory team came to me and said, hey, instead of us getting this ServiceNow ticket after you built the VM, can you add that to your automation? So we did. And then the NSX team came to us and said, hey, could you tag these VMs as part of your build process? So we did. So I kind of considered automation a constant state of change, because when you're successful, the silos and the other teams will come to you, because if you can save them time getting all these ServiceNow tickets, you'd be surprised how much they'll let you do, even though you're in silos. But prove to them that you're successful first, and build it and they will come. Kind of thing. And the one thing I like to kind of give people advice on, and Don and his group was really good about that. When you understand with Orchestrator that any question that you ask on a custom form within VRA catalog can become a parameter in a script, and I have blogs about this, and I spoke at VMware Explorer about this. When you understand that little concept, there's nothing that you can't automate with VCF automation. So if you can write a script that you can pass parameters to it, you can load balancers. I did, Microsoft 365 stuff, OneDrive, even stuff that's not VMware related. Once you understand that little concept, there's nothing you can't automate.
So Dale, could you automate, I don't know, like having a workflow where someone can ask AI a question right there inside the service catalog? Give me an example like that, right?
Well, actually, 2 years ago at VMware Explorer, the hackathon, what my team did is we created a ARIA automation catalog item that asked prompts that sent the questions to ChatGPT and brought back the replies and showed them on the screen. So with a little, and there again, that's because we would pass those questions as a parameter to a PowerShell script that reached out to ChatGPT and then replied the answers. So, yeah, wrap your head around that, and you'll do some amazing things.
Because the key part of this is all programmatic, right?
Yes.
So even if you were, hey, I can make an API call external to GPT, or I have a running Llama instance internally, or I've got my own private AI platform running inside of our organization that we want to have our teams be able to communicate with. So that's where we get in our next area. What are some areas beyond just deploying deploying VMs or VM creation? What are some of the use cases that you are doing, or that you kind of look at aspirationally to? Don, why don't you kick us off and some things that go beyond VM creation, if you can?
Sure. And this kind of goes along with some of the things we talked about before, where you're investing a little bit of time now to save yourself a lot of time collectively down the road. So one of those things is reporting. Think about the number of reports that you interact with on a routine basis. Do you run an RVTools report every month, every quarter, every week? What about snapshot reports? Or if you use as-built report, CDP, any of those things, how often are you running those reports? Is it a manual process? Are you running it for every vCenter or just, the primary? And so what we've done is we have RVTools run on the first of every month, in addition to as-built report, CDP reports. And those are all things that are now automated in Orchestrator. So they run, let's just say 2 or 3 a.m. And that saves me and my team from having to, okay, let's open RVTools on our local workstations, wait for it to collect the information, export it to Excel, so on and so forth, especially for like as-built report. That can take like an hour to run depending on the size of your environment. So these are all things that are now offloaded to us, and it's stored, their output to a file share or email if you prefer that as well. All without any interaction from the administrator or the engineer. So that was a time savings. One of the other things is I mentioned a snapshot report. So here at Moffitt, we're a fan of array-based snapshots. We use tin-tree arrays for the most part, and tin-tree has a really great model for object-oriented snapshots. Every VM can have a protection schedule, etc. The problem is if you capture, as the administrator, a snapshot of a VM through tin-tree's web interface, there is no way to make it expire. It's a manual snapshot and it will stay there for life. And there's no great way to identify, when you look at an entire array, how many of those snapshots exist across all your VMs. So one of the things I worked on is using Orchestrator, an API call to the tin-tree web interface that says, give me all your manually created snapshots that don't have an expiration date, and drop them in a table that emails to our storage team and says, hey, this week we have 20 snapshots that are, multiple days old. No one's cleaned up after it. Go forth and clean, right? If they wanted us to, I'm sure we could expand that to automatically purge them as well. But that's, again, addressing the business ask, which was just to report on it. But anything that has an API, you can absolutely automate. If it doesn't, and it's something that you can interact with PowerShell or Bash, you can absolutely run commands against a Linux server or a Windows server to achieve similar results, depending on if you're using a third-party app to provide information or what have you. But Dale and I both, I'm sure others have blogged about how you can leverage what we'll call a script host. In this case, for me anyway, a PowerShell server, a server that has PowerShell and for us, RVTools installed, and we're remotely executing commands against it for some of the things that are easier done on a Windows server programmatically versus Orchestrator natively.
I do want to touch on this. So there was that aligns kind of perfectly with a question that that Doug had in the Q&A. And the question was, what's the feeling on PowerCLI? We make extensive use of Orchestrator, right? And I want to kind of touch on that, and it aligns exactly with what you're saying there as well, Don. There's different lenses of automation. When we're talking about this, initial, hey, VM creation or regular type of activities or service catalog items or menu items, we're talking about there's a request for an action. We have created an automation process for that action, and then we execute on that action. But sometimes there's a need to automate things all the time, whether through a script host, or for a lot of you may have ARIA operations or VROPs, vRealize operations or VCF operations, whatever, or VCOPs, right? As we go way back. A lot of you have that inside of your environments. And any of you who have been running at least 8.4 and higher, right? So the latest version is 8.18.3. If any of you are running operations, you may realize there's a function in there called Automation Central, which can do automated tasks outside of the regular automation suite, but automated tasks for your vCenter. Things like powering off of virtual machines, things like right-sizing your virtual machines, either up in resources or down in resources, reclamation of space from snapshots, reclamation of powered off VMs. Hey, that VM's been powered off for 1,000 days. Maybe we should delete that. That's functionality that lives right there in the box. Is that something we can do with the VCF automation? Yes, absolutely. Should we? No, you should totally. Yeah, you should if you're using it as part of a life cycle thing and then you're having to manage that life cycle down. However, you can have that deviation. Yeah, VCF automation should be cleaning that up. But if it's older than 60 days and for whatever reason it doesn't, yeah, let this thing kick into high gear and take advantage of it, right? Take advantage of cleaning it up. And all of that is independent of using Orchestrator. That's purely VROPS's connectivity to the vCenter and its relationship it has there. And that's kind of the key that we kind of drive home there is use the right tool in the right place. Whether you have a script server that runs those scripts on a regular basis and you've got a cron job that goes and does, hey, make sure everything is not a fixed disk and instead it's round robin. I'm not saying that's something I would do often. I would go scan 1,000,000 LUNs and make sure that sometimes they would be set to fix this. And that's not something I would normally use automation for beyond kicking off a script that would go and check that and change that for me. But identifying the right tool for the outcome and then getting what you want out of it, right? That's kind of a key part in there. Now we've got just a kind of few minutes here left. I want to ask Anthony, if you have you find any barriers to adopting and anything that people can resonate with, like that same type of issue, barriers to adopting things that are beyond VM creation or even just, regular adoption on a consistent basis?
From my experience, the barriers of adoption and automation usually comes from within. A lot of times sometimes you'll butt heads with Linux engineers. They'll say, why do we have to have that? I can do everything in Ansible. But you're the only one who can do everything in Ansible. That's not what we're trying to accomplish here. So sometimes it's trying to get your own teammates and own engineers to buy in, and just to try to show them and say, like, look, this is something that can enhance what you're doing, help with your job, and actually unify everything with what all of us are doing together. We're not trying to take down Ansible or anything like that. We want to take advantage of it, kind of like what we mentioned before of utilizing other resources that we already have. And the barriers usually I've had is to just to talk them off the ledge, kind of a thing, where like we don't need to argue about what's better, what does the job better. What we want to do is you're doing your job, and also goes back to the whole silo thing that some Linux engineers like to be in their silo, and we just want to bridge that gap and work with them a little bit more to provide them a unifying interface for that will say, you know what, we're deploying everything in the same manner. We want to take advantage of the things that you've already done, and it's getting them to relax on we know you're good at what you do. We know you put a lot into this. We know all the features in Ansible and all the automation scripting you've performed. Let's just work together on it. That's been my most consistent barrier to get across. Management's always been on our side on trying to simplify work. It's getting your own teammates to buy in on it too, and just make it so that sometimes engineers get confrontational. So we're not trying to compete. We're just trying to make it. This is going to be a team effort, and I don't want anyone to think it's me versus you at any time.
Well, and I like that. And the kind of takeaway from that is anything and everything can be programmatic. Automation's not just about deploy an operating system and then configure a thing. It can be about, deeper components as well, networking, storage, and every other piece of there. All right, we've got a few minutes left. Scott had an amazing question around auto healing type features. So one of our other panelists, I want to note every one of our panelists is either a customer or was a customer 5 minutes ago, right? For those who have joined us here at VMware as well. So I want Mark, if you can talk a little bit about the operations actions and the Orchestrator workflow. We would absolutely love that if you.
Yeah, so we do have a plugin in operations where you can actually discover workflows that are in Orchestrator. And by using operations actions on alerts, for example, if you take an example of auto healing a disk that's out of space, you can capture that alert and trigger an action that would trigger a workflow that would run a PowerShell or to add disk or expand disk. That's the type of use case that we often see.
So, and I want to note a key piece on there is in 8.18. A lot of things happen in 8.18. foreshadowing for next month's webinar on all the new features coming in 8.18. But in 8.18 alone, we introduced a configuration drift feature where it can identify when things deviate from the configuration. So you establish what a baseline is. Operations will know that baseline, and it'll know when things deviate from that. And that's where you can use actions like this to go and heal things to a degree. Can you do things from a fully constant monitoring of, hey, make sure if this thing deviates from that, I want you to go and do that? There are capabilities along that was primarily within the SaltStack capabilities we had. What was with the beacon and the beacon and the detector that would identify something that was inconsistent and continually reinforce it back to that original state. But there definitely had been, capabilities we've had in the past, and we just continue to invest in those to make them things that you will use, right? Because the key part is making sure it's something that's going to make sense for you as operators, you as automators and such. So as we get into the last few kind of wrapping up here points, any last words for you, Don?
I do want to touch on a question that Doug asked earlier about using PowerCLI versus Orchestrator. And if my advice there that I want to touch on is, if there is an out-of-the-box workflow in Orchestrator for, I'm just going to say, powering off a VM, powering on a VM, things like that, the Orchestrator workflow has already done the work for you to determine whether that action was successful. Versus in PowerCLI, it's up to you as, the person playing the role of a developer to decide, do I want to wrap this in a try expression? What's my validation to make sure that, yes, I executed this command, but it actually did something, and more importantly, what I intended it to do. The Orchestrator workflows have all that logic built in already to, either proceed to the next step if there is one, or to fail if the action did not yield the expected outcome. So that's an important decision point for choosing one or the other.
Absolutely. Anthony, any closing remarks?
Oh yeah, just a real quick one. When you're talking about other than deployments and such like that, we're diving into the realm of, especially if you're working with wevelopers and DevOps teams, the automation of Tanzu deployments. We currently where I'm at, we're deployed our first Tanzu cluster, and we're getting into Kubernetes very heavily. And we know that the administrative staff are primarily Linux engineers that they're having to adopt this new environment, and to help them, they're going to be working with us to help them make their jobs a little bit better when it comes to developers requesting resources or automating the process for them to deploy their own clusters and namespaces underneath that Tanzu supervisor environment. So they're excited to look into that kind of a feature, so that automation of containerized applications becomes a lot more efficient, so that they're not spending time trying to do the work for the developers, and the developers don't have all the access to do what they got to do. Because in particular environments, some teams may get more carried away than others, and you want to make sure that they stay in their lanes and deploy what they're supposed to outside of their sandbox. So that is an automation feature that is, kind of outside the realm of the standard VM. At the same time, we're going to provide, we're testing and working on providing them, the Linux team's, resources to query Active Directory and perform some Active Directory tasks through a catalog interface, because they're not regularly on a Windows machine. They're on a Linux machine with a Linux interface. They need Active Directory access. I'm getting asked all the time for information about this group, that group, permissions, and so forth. Why not provide them with an interface, or at least a series of menus from maybe a remote PowerShell deployment interface, so that they can perform, hey, hit this option, you want to look at your menu, you want to look at your groups, add some users, and so on and so forth, help them do their job a little bit better without having to teach them how to, or maybe they're not familiar with Active Directory, but just give them an interface so they can do their jobs a little bit easier. And that's a totally new out of the box solution than the standard, oh, I'm going to stand up a VM and just do X, Y, and Z task.
Well, absolutely. And the new features and functionality we announced in the last month alone with VKS and what's coming in the future is just tripling down on that to make it a more functional, usable platform for more than just VMs, right? And for more than just base container sub functions and such like that. Brian, I want you to bring us home and then I'll wrap us up.
Alrighty. I would say just kind of soaking up, and by the way, I appreciate everybody contributing, having our customers on and whatnot. But the thing that I would close out as far as like skill set, like the kinds of things that people typically list off stuff like no scripting language, your PowerCLIs, your Pythons, no JSON and no YAML. There's a little known secret if you've never done automation before, and I'm going to go on the record saying this, and this is the thing that I'm going to defend. Learn REST APIs. The secret about REST APIs is they're not that hard. It's an action, it's a JSON payload, and if you have the Swagger documentation and Postman, once you do it one time, and you can do it safely doing, stuff like I just want to get a read of what's in there, that opens up a whole new set of capabilities that you didn't have previously, because a lot of times in automation platforms, you have what's called the I can't do that one thing syndrome. And REST API capabilities typically can punch through that and say, okay, I can do this at 100% zero touch rather than having to do this one thing manually to stage it. So I would say that like if you're on an automation journey somewhere in there, put learning REST APIs. Anybody on this call can probably help you and get you in that direction. But I think that that's probably because we've been flippantly saying, oh, use the API for that. Well, the commentary is don't be afraid of it, lean in. It can be another one of those skill sets that sets you up for zero touch.
So, and I want to wrap on that point directly, and even Dale's comment in the chat is exactly that point. Sometimes things are bigger than you, right? And you're like, I don't even know where to begin on this. I need to go. I'm going to go connect that to the API. Tools like GPT and Gemini and other Grok and other pieces like that can be absolutely instrumental. Perfect way to get started. Oh, I want to integrate with this API, but I don't even know how to work with Swagger. So you'd say, how do I get started? And it'll start to build out an iterative process for you to start using it. And you could be working against an API that it doesn't have familiar with, or you want to put it in context, feed it the API and say, here's the API, help me try to do this. Because when you think about things conversationally, the same kind of way you would ask me or Brian or Dale or any one of us, how do I do that thing? That's the same kind of conversation you can have with GPT. So you can start to build out those use cases, that functionality to give you that comfortability. So you can do the basic things and then start to build and iterate upon that. Because that's kind of the key at the end of the day is get comfortable with what you're doing, make it work really well, and then build. Because that's how we all started. Automate the one piece, and then we automated all of the things. So I don't want us to go over on time, and I appreciate you all for being here in this inaugural kickoff of the Architects Edge Live. I'll be announcing in next month's newsletter the one I'll be doing for next month. It's going to be quite a hoot, focused around some operations and visibility components. So I hope you guys will have a chance to join that. And thank you guys all so much for joining us today.